Welcome to the podcast Group Dynamics. My name is Roland Schuster. This is the third and last part of a conversation with Carmen Lane, who is located at the NTL Institute in the United States.
Self-determination, self-differentiation is a threat to someone who, from his system's perspective, wants the past to return to the here and now.
If you look at another big group dynamic school which is connected to the NTL, which is Tavistock, the origin of Tavistock were phenomena they had of homecoming soldiers of the First World War. So again, a sort of war-contained thing. The fact how widespread war still is for me only a fact that tells me how important group dynamic work is, and to go on working on that level of energies with people.
Absolutely. The thing for me, if we're going to keep playing with this, is that the intervention of war, because it is an intervention, is a containment. It is an instruction not to self-differentiate. It's an instruction not to be human. It's an instruction not to be a whole person, but an object in service of a larger system. The thing that came up for me while you were talking is that not only did Kurt Lewin kind of found and create NTL and continue to expand his body of knowledge in a U.S. context, that if we remove the overculture, as Joy Harjo would say, of the United States and think about his relationship and connection and contact with the land in North America, or as indigenous people would call Turtle Island, that Turtle Island is the site of the oldest democracy on Earth that was developed by the Haudenosaunee people. And so for Kurt Lewin to root as a core principle in his work democratic values, that there was something also in the intervention of war and the anticipation, right? He was tracking the energy of what was happening in his homeland where he needed to then shift. And shift not only for his own safety and the safety of his family, but to also have a new container to imagine another kind of world that he was tracking as possible. We're not warring, we're not intervening with war because we don't know what's possible. We're intervening with war because we absolutely know what is possible.
And we don't want it to happen.
And we don't want it to happen. And the system does not want it to happen. The reason I want to highlight that is that in order to intervene effectively, we have to be able to attend to what is. And if our conditioning tells us that in order to be comfortable, we have to reject the idea that systems are aware of itself when they engage in oppressive behaviors, then that also keeps us in a place of inaction and defaulting in a way that is not distinguishing. And from my perspective, the role of the intervener, whether that person is an artist, whether that person is a facilitator, is to intervene at the largest present system to offer the potential for a new edge of change. And I'm using Ukraine as an example because for those of us who were tracking it, we were aware of the shift that was happening around being a democratic nation and connecting with a different configuration of leadership in that region and anticipating resistance potentially. And I'm not saying that to be romanticized because I also think that there are dynamics in which we are aware that Ukraine would be a target, and how does it benefit other systems for Ukraine to be transformed in the way that it's being transformed by war right now. I don't want to seem overly hopeful, but I do know that anyone can intervene, and it doesn't matter. It's not about good or bad or right or wrong. If we are clear and grounded and aware of what is happening in the moment, there are certain interventions that are just effective. And I think we want to relegate things that we look at as evil as not intelligent. And it's not accurate.
It's kind of overwhelming if you look at this large scale like Ukraine and Russia right now, and it's so large and so many people involved and so many interests involved and a lot of money. On the other hand, if I bring it back into the group, the interesting thing is, and you mentioned it when we started talking about the HI lab, that whenever in a group people meet, you have the whole system it's like a picture of it. It's like a sort of miniature of it. I remember we had a meeting where we were working with international students, and for me it was also an intervention to give my best as a facilitator to enable those international students, no matter where they come from, no matter where they had their roots and families and so forth, to somehow be able to connect and work with each other. And I think one should not underestimate this potential of working in such groups and letting people know each other and getting in contact with each other and trying out themselves in having choice points, in even seeing choice points, or even first time in their life maybe getting the idea that there might be a choice.
It's really important for people to have, for groups to have experiences where they complete work. Even if there is some kind of failure or miss in the experiment, that the facilitator, the group can hold the moment in a way that the learning is complete. And out there, meaning outside of the learning environment, most often people don't get the feedback. They don't get to complete themselves or feel complete enough to move on. And then that keeps them from experimenting. So I think it's critical for people to be able to practice completing a moment, having that witnessed by others and affirmed and noted in a way that is significant. And I know that supporting not just the group's ability to experience itself, but to have an experience, period, is a part of the learning, because from my perspective, interventions that are forms of oppression at its core prevents individuals, communities, societies to have experiences and contact with itself. And that most forms of oppression keep people and systems from having contact. And that is the power of group dynamics, is to understand the power of group, the power of self in a group, but also to be able to play with and track not just group dynamics, but power dynamics within groups. And practicing intervening in a way that uses yourself rather than your positional power or your social group identity as the thing that helps you, quote unquote, win or solve the problem. That there are more resources in ourselves as human beings than in our positionality to impact our ability to change and to use our internal sources of power versus positional power. And people need to practice being able to track the difference when one uses power from a different standpoint.
If you look at groups and your work as a facilitator, how would you describe the capacity to support groups? What is that for you?
I'll turn it back to you. I mean, you've experienced some of my capacity. How would you assess that? What feedback would you give me?
For me, it is the ability to hear on the deeper layer. There are a lot of words there, and the words, to a certain point, you can see the words as noise, not really as data. And it's sometimes difficult to know when words are used to transport a message that is hidden behind the words. And sometimes this message is different than the message of the words. And for me, you are one of those facilitators who have the ability to really know what the basic message is, no matter what words are used.
I appreciate that. For me, all interventions are group level interventions. So I'm always thinking about and choose to intervene in a way with the awareness that it is being witnessed by others and it will support the learning of others. And so I take seriously someone's choice to do work in community. And even if I'm coaching somebody one to one, it's still a group level intervention because they're taking that learning back to the system and the systems that they're a part of. So I'm always thinking about how we are interconnected and how something that gets evoked in an individual is also being evoked in the system, is also being evoked in the world. And I take that relationship, the ways in which systems thinking supports individual growth. I don't ever romanticize the idea that we're interconnected. It is very practical information that supports my work and our learning collectively. And so I do that in my art practice. I'm a sculptor, I do installation work. So for me, installation work is both an experience that an individual will have in a gallery, in a museum, in a public art form. They're having an individual experience, but it's happening at the group level because the work is in a public space, and it's an intervention for the public to take in, whoever that public is, whatever configuration of public emerges. And I'm not present to witness the impact of that intervention. And similarly in group work, in that just because there is learning and awareness that I get to see within the boundary of that group's experience, there may be an awareness, transformation, change, practice that occurs 6 months later, 10 years later, instantly, but internally, that is not for my consumption. So I take seriously the fact that we are here for a reason. Whatever configuration of group emerges, that's the group that needs to learn from each other. I don't know who's going to see my art. I don't know who's going to read my article. I don't know. Sometimes I do get feedback from others that say, hey, this moment had an impact on me. And that for me is extra, or maybe the moment in time in which I receive that feedback is at a moment where I need to learn and grow or remember what it means to have a practice that is intervention based. And I think anyone who doesn't make central the fact that this work in group dynamics, this work of human systems isn't about intervening, then you're not a practitioner, then you're not interested in change. It's not enough to show up. You have to intervene. And part of intervening is tracking how your presence evokes and provokes the system.
You mean that from the position as a facilitator or in general?
In general, as a human being. Like for me, part of being a human being is intervening. When someone is born and they come into this world, that's a hell of an intervention. And if you have a chance to witness birth or to witness someone dying, those are interventions. But I'm really speaking about as facilitators, as practitioners of group dynamics, to witness the birth of a human being that has nothing to do with you. If you have a chance to do it, I would encourage it. If you have the chance to witness somebody leave their bodies, to close themselves out, that you have no relationship with, they're not your family, they're not your spouse, they're just a human being at the end of their life, closing themselves out, that you should witness is that it will deeply improve your ability to do group work. I believe in the power of intervening, of having contact that catalyzes into whatever next state that I need to be in whatever way I need to prepare for the next client, the next experience. This work is an art form. It's not just a science. A T group is a kind of concentrate of a lived experience of a group. There's a birth, the life of the group, and its ending. I think most people who do group work don't close things out well with groups, but it's critical. How we close ourselves out is how well the group will integrate its learning and take it with them. And something that actually closes itself out, then the responsibility emerges to how will you carry on the legacy and the learnings of that experience with you into the next experience. And we're afraid. People are afraid of endings. Doesn't matter if it's the end of a relationship, the end of a career, retirement, the end of having sight and having to wear glasses. These kinds of changes are required for learning. Not everything is supposed to be forever. And I think that's what war is. Let's create this thing that we can hold on to for as long as we can. I think there is a constant war going on against those groups of people who still understand these natural cycles of life that we're talking about. And so when I think about the way, particularly practitioners of group dynamics, the way we commodify indigenous knowledge into our group dynamics practices, what are our responsibilities to the places and the peoples whom we've received that knowledge from? For example, Abraham Maslow, the majority of his research is based on the teachings and the cultural lives of the Blackfoot Indians of North America, giving a citation and annotation to Maslow when it's really this binary between the settler and the indigenous person. That is the tension, that they're a threat, but also we perceive some kind of development in ourselves as practitioners. And I think that we should find non traditional forms of professional development in group dynamics, particularly if we are invited and welcomed by other communities. But we also need to get permissions from those communities to then apply that learning in other ways and understand and learn what the protocols are and how to acknowledge who our teachers are. You talk about, Roland, that not only have you learned from Malidoma Some, but also the pushes and the questions and the invitations that have come from him. That for me is important. Back to your question about my capacity as a practitioner is that I understand that in my individual practice is collaborative and that I'm accessing the knowledge and learning and teachings from many sources that are informing what I'm doing in the here and now. And all of that and all of those people are present with me in service of the microcosm. And so that for me is part of why I'm good at what I do, is that I'm not trying to be the guru.
Well, it seems to me a nice ending point. One important thing is for the facilitator not trying to be a guru. Thank you very much for joining me here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
This was the third and last part of a conversation with Carmen M. Lane. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned.